It was almost 2 in the morning, and I was sitting on my own kitchen floor in the dark, with my back against the cabinets and my phone in my hand, scrolling through 4 days of footage from the camera by our front door. My husband was asleep upstairs, and I was looking, deliberately, with a sick and pounding heart, for the proof that he was cheating on me. I found footage instead that I have not stopped seeing since. It was my husband, alone, in our front hallway, on a Tuesday afternoon, and he had no idea anyone would ever watch it. I want to stop right there, on that image, because everything in our marriage divides into before I watched that clip and after. For 4 months, I had been building a case in my head, brick by brick, and the case had a verdict, and the verdict was that my husband was leaving me. That clip was supposed to be the last brick. Instead, it took the whole wall down. My name is Donna Brennan. I am 54 years old, and I have cut and colored hair in the same small salon in Indianapolis, Indiana, for almost 30 years. I have been married to my husband Mark for 28 of them. I am going to tell you what the camera caught in our hallway that Tuesday. But to understand why it hit me the way it did, you have to understand the 4 months that came before it and the story I had quietly told myself about the man I married. Mark and I have a good marriage. I want to say that plainly at the start because it matters. Not a perfect one, 28 years does not stay perfect, but a real one, a steady one, the kind where you can sit in a room together saying nothing and feel held. For most of those years, I knew my husband the way you know a song you have sung your whole life. Let me tell you what kind of man Mark is, because it matters to everything that went wrong. Mark is the steady one. In 28 years, I have almost never seen him rattled. He is the husband who handles things. The flat tire, the hospital visit, the difficult phone call. Calmly, quietly, without drama, so that the people around him can breathe. Our grown kids call him first when something breaks, because Mark does not panic. I have leaned on that steadiness for the whole of my adult life. It is one of the things I married him for. There's a saying that you should be careful about your strengths, because under enough pressure, they curdle into the exact thing that hurts you most. And I had never understood that saying until this year. And it did not occur to me, not for 1 second in those 4 months, that a man whose entire identity is being the calm one, the one who carries things, the one who does not let his people see him afraid, it did not occur to me that such a man, handed something genuinely terrifying, would do exactly what he had always done. He would handle it quietly. He would carry it. He would not let his people see. The very steadiness I loved him for was the thing that was about to nearly break us. And then, about 4 months before that night on the kitchen floor, the song changed. It was not sudden. It was a slow, creeping wrongness, the kind you notice and then talk yourself out of and then notice again. Mark went quiet. Not our comfortable quiet, a new quiet, a closed-door quiet. He stopped reaching for me. He started going out in the afternoons, 2 or 3 times a week, with explanations that were always just a little too smooth and a little too vague. An errand, a thing for work, nothing, don't worry about it. He would come home from these afternoons, gray-faced and exhausted and short with me, and he would wave off every question I asked, and some nights, he would go to bed before the sun was even fully down. I tried to talk to him. I want that on the record because later I blamed myself for not pushing harder, and I have had to be fair to the version of me who was living it. I asked him, more than once, in the gentle way you ask a husband you do not want to accuse of anything, "Are you all right? Is it work? Is it us? Did I do something? Talk to me." And every time, Mark would give me a small, tired smile and say some version of, "I'm fine, Donna. It's nothing, don't worry." And a wife of 28 years knows that it's nothing is almost never nothing. But she also knows she cannot pry open a man who has decided to stay shut. So I would let it go, and lie awake, and let the not knowing grow another inch in the dark. 4 months of, "I'm fine." 4 months of a word I knew was a lie and could not get behind. I am going to tell you the conclusion I came to, and I am not proud of it, but I am going to be honest, because the honesty is the whole point of telling you any of this. I have been a hairdresser for 30 years, which means I have stood behind a chair and listened to a few thousand women tell me about their marriages. And I have heard this exact list of symptoms more times than I can count. The new distance, the unexplained afternoons, the flinching from questions, the man coming home drained and strange. And in those salon stories, the list almost always meant one thing. So, at night, lying next to my silent husband, my mind took that list and did the arithmetic everyone's mind would do, and it arrived, again and again, at the same cold answer. There was someone else. My husband was having an affair, and he was working up the nerve to leave me. I did not confront him. I want you to understand the state I was in. I was not angry yet. I was frightened. The specific, drowning fright of a woman who believes the floor of her entire life is about to give way, and cannot prove it, and cannot stop bracing for it. For 4 months, I lived inside that fear. And then one night, I could not carry the not knowing for 1 more hour. We had a video camera at the front door. An ordinary thing, we had put it up after a neighbor's packages got stolen. And I realized, lying awake, that it had been quietly recording the comings and goings of my husband for months. So I went downstairs, and I sat on the kitchen floor, and I started scrolling, hunting for my proof. I want to be honest about the shame of that night, sitting on the floor scrolling, because the shame is part of the lesson. What I was doing was not a noble investigation. I was a frightened woman who had decided she already knew the verdict and was now hunting for the footage to confirm it. I had stopped asking my husband and started surveilling him. And I want to say clearly that I am not proud of having reached that point. A marriage where one person is scrolling security footage at 2 in the morning is a marriage where something has already gone badly wrong, even if no one has betrayed anyone. But here's the thing I have had to sit with. The wrong turn was not the camera. The wrong turn was 4 months earlier, the first time I accepted "I'm fine" and decided it was easier to quietly suspect my husband than to refuse to let him shut me out. The camera was just where 4 months of unspoken fear finally led. If we had been honest in month 1, there would have been nothing for me to scroll for in month 4. I found the Tuesday clip almost by accident. It was time-stamped on an afternoon I had been at the salon, an afternoon Mark had told me he had a thing to take care of. And I am ashamed of this, I expected to see him leave to meet someone. Instead, the clip showed him coming home, alone. And what he did when he came home is the thing I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Mark came through the front door, and he did not know the camera saw the hallway. And the moment the door shut behind him, my husband, my steady, capable husband, simply stopped holding himself up. He sagged back against the wall of our own hallway and slid down it until he was sitting on the floor, and he stayed there. He sat on the floor of our front hallway, alone, for a long time, with his head back against the wall and his eyes closed, and his face was the face of a man at the absolute end of his strength. Then he reached into his coat pocket and took out a prescription bottle and another, and he took the pills there on the floor, with no water, and he kept sitting. He sat on that floor gathering himself for almost 20 minutes. And then, and this is the part that broke me open, I watched my husband physically rebuild his own face. I watched him breathe and straighten and arrange his features into something ordinary and fine, and stand up and become, before my eyes, the version of Mark he had been showing me for 4 months. The version that was a performance. He had been performing being all right in our own home every single day, and the camera had caught him in the 4 seconds between the truth and the show. I watched that clip again, and again, maybe 10 times, there on the kitchen floor, with my hand pressed over my mouth. Because there was a detail I had missed the first time, and once I saw it, I could not unsee it. Before Mark stood up and rebuilt his face, right at the end, just before, he did one more thing. He looked up the staircase toward our bedroom, toward where I would be sleeping that night, and he sat there looking up those stairs for a few seconds with an expression I had never seen on my husband's face in 28 years. It was not guilt. I had spent 4 months expecting guilt. It was grief, and it was tenderness, and it was fear, all at once. The face of a man looking towards someone he loves and is trying, with everything he has, to protect from something. That was the moment I knew, all the way down, that whatever this was, my husband had not been betraying me. He had been standing guard. I sat on that kitchen floor and I did not understand yet. But I understood enough to know that I had been wrong, catastrophically, shamefully wrong, and that whatever was happening to my husband, it was not another woman. It was something that made a strong man sit down on the floor, and I needed to know what it was. I did not wake him that night. I did something quieter and, I think, more honest. The next morning, after Mark left for one of his errands, I looked. Not through his private things to catch him, through them to understand him, which I have decided is a different thing, though I know it sits close to the line. And it did not take long. The prescription bottles, the appointment cards tucked away, all of them scheduled in the windows of time when he knew I would be at the salon. A folder, and inside the folder, in plain clinical language I had to read 3 times before it would hold still, was the truth my husband had been carrying alone for 4 months. Mark was seriously ill. He had a real diagnosis, a frightening one, the kind of word that rearranges a life, and he had received it 4 months earlier, almost to the day that the song first changed. He had been going to his appointments alone. He had been starting his treatment alone. He had been absorbing the most terrifying news of his life entirely alone, in stolen afternoons, and then coming home and sitting on our hallway floor to put his face back on before I got home from work. I sat on the edge of our bed with that folder in my lap for a long time, and I want to tell you about the 2 feelings that arrived, because they arrived together and they did not agree with each other. The first feeling was a flood of relief so violent it frightened me, because some animal part of me, the part that had spent 4 months braced for him to leave, heard the words, "He is not leaving you," louder than it heard anything else, and felt, for one shameful second, glad. And then the second feeling came in right behind it and knocked the first one flat. And the second feeling was terror, pure and cold, because the man I loved was sick, really sick, and had been sick for 4 months while I was busy being afraid of the wrong thing entirely. I sat there ashamed of my relief and drowning in my fear, and I understood that I had wasted 4 months. 4 months I could never get back, grieving the loss of a marriage that was never actually in danger, while the real danger sat quietly in a folder my husband kept where I would not look. So now I knew what. The question that kept me up the next several nights was why? Why, in 28 years of marriage, would my husband carry something like this without me? And when Mark finally told me, his answer was not what I expected, and it was not simple, and it has changed how I think about love. I told him that night. I did not ambush him with the footage or the folder. I had thought hard about how to do it, and in the end, I just sat down across from my husband and told him, plainly, that I knew. That I had been frightened for 4 months, that I had let myself believe terrible things, that I had finally gone looking, and that I had found the camera footage and then the folder, and that I knew he was sick. And I watched my husband's carefully built face come apart, all at once, the way a face does when a weight it has been holding for 4 months is suddenly set down. And then Mark told me why. He told me that when the diagnosis came, his very first thought, before his own fear, before anything, was of me. He said he could not stand the image of it, of telling me and watching the fear come into my face, and then having to live inside this house with that fear, with both of us frightened, every dinner and every morning soaked in it. He said he had decided, in the doctor's office, that he could protect me from at least the first part of it. That he would carry the terror alone through the worst early stretch, the tests, the unknowns, the start of treatment, and that he would tell me later, once there was something more solid to tell, once he could hand me a fact instead of a freefall. He said, "I thought if I loved you, I would carry it so you didn't have to. I thought that was the gift." He told me more, once he started, 4 months of it coming out at once. He told me about the morning of the diagnosis, how he had driven home from that appointment and sat in our driveway for an hour, unable to come inside, because he knew that the moment he walked through the door and looked at my face, he would either have to tell me or start lying to me, and he had not been ready to do either. He told me he had nearly broken, and told me a dozen times, that there had been whole evenings where the words were right there in his throat, and that each time he had looked at me, at me just living my ordinary, unfrightened evening, and had not been able to be the one to take that away from me. He said the hardest part had not been the appointments or the treatment. The hardest part had been me. The hardest part had been coming home every single day to the person he most wanted to tell and performing, for her, the lie that he was fine. He told me he would sit in the car some evenings and practice. Actually practice. The ordinary face, the ordinary voice, before he could trust himself to walk in. My husband was rehearsing how to be normal in his own marriage, in his own driveway, alone. He said, "I was so lonely, Donna. I was lonely in my own house, next to my own wife, and I built that loneliness myself, and I could not figure out how to undo it." And I realized, hearing that my husband's plan to protect me had cost him the one thing that might have actually helped him bear it: me. I have thought about that sentence more than almost anything my husband has ever said to me. I thought if I loved you, I would carry it so you didn't have to, because I understood it. That is the terrible thing. I understood it completely. It came from love. It was not cowardice, and it was not deception for its own sake. It was a frightened man looking at the person he loved most and deciding that the most loving thing he could do was to stand between her and the fear and absorb the blow with his own body. There is something almost noble in the shape of it. But sitting across from him that night, I had to tell my husband the other half of the truth, the half he could not see from inside his own fear. I had to tell him what his protection had actually done. Because for 4 months, I had not been protected. For 4 months, I had been frightened anyway. Just frightened of the wrong thing. Frightened and alone, and building a case that my husband was leaving me. His silence had not spared me fear. It had only changed what I was afraid of, and made me afraid by myself, in the dark, with no one to hold. And worse, far worse, his silence had taken something from me that I would have wanted more than I have ever wanted anything. It had taken 4 months. 4 months of appointments I could have sat in. 4 months of hands I could have held in waiting rooms. 4 months of being his wife in the fullest and hardest sense of the word. He had not given me a gift by carrying it alone. He had quietly, lovingly, robbed me of the chance to carry it with him. I want to tell you what those days did to my memory of the 4 months, because it is its own kind of grief. Because once I knew, I had to go back through every strange, distant, frightening day and reread it. The afternoon Mark snapped at me over nothing, and then apologized with tears in his eyes. I had filed that as guilt, as a man ashamed of an affair. It had been a man who had come home from a treatment that left him hollowed out and had nothing left with which to be gentle. The nights he went to bed before dark, I had read those as a husband avoiding me, withdrawing his presence. They had been the nights his body simply could not stay upright any longer. Every single piece of evidence I had gathered for the case that my husband was leaving me turned out to be evidence of the exact opposite. Evidence of a man so determined not to burden me that he was spending himself down to nothing to keep me from seeing. I had looked at my husband fighting for his life, and I had seen a man sneaking away from our marriage. I had never been further from the truth in my life. And there was one memory that reread itself in a way I have not recovered from. About 2 months into all of this, on a bad night, I had finally worked up the courage to half-ask the real question. I had said to him, quietly, in the dark, "Mark, if there's something you need to tell me, I can take it." And he had been silent for a long moment, and then he had said, "There's nothing, Donna. Go to sleep." At the time, that silence had felt to me like the silence of a man choosing not to confess an affair, and it had nearly finished me. I know now what that silence actually was. It was my husband, lying in the dark beside me, holding a death-sized fear, hearing his wife open the door for him, and deciding, out of love, not to walk through it. He had been that close. I had been that close to knowing. And his love for me, the very thing that should have let the truth out, was the exact thing that kept the door shut. That is the cruelest knot in this whole story, and I have had to make my peace with the fact that there is no untangling it now, only forgiving it. Here is what we did, and what we are still doing. The carrying alone ended that night. I made that not a request, but a fact. I told Mark that I was his wife, that I had signed up for exactly this, that in sickness was not fine print, and that he did not get to fire me from my own marriage out of kindness. From the next appointment on, I have been in the room. I sit in the waiting rooms. I hold the hand. I have learned the language of his illness, and I keep the calendar, and I am there for the gray-faced afternoons. And here is the thing my husband did not believe, and has now seen for himself. It is better. It is better for him. The fear, it turns out, is lighter when it is split in two. He had imagined that telling me would double the fear in our house. The opposite happened. Shared, the same fear weighs less than half. He spent 4 months protecting me from a weight that would have been lighter the moment he let me take an end of it. I changed things at the salon too, and I tell you this small, practical detail because it turned out to matter more than I expected. I cut my hours. For 30 years, that salon and that chair had been a fixed point of my identity, and I had assumed, vaguely, that being a good wife through this would mean somehow doing everything I already did, plus all of the new weight. It does not work that way, and I learned it fast. Being able to actually be in the waiting room, to be unhurried on the gray afternoons, to not be performing my own version of fine for clients while my husband fought for his life. That required me to let some things go. And here is what I want you to hear. I did not lose anything that mattered by letting them go. The 4 months Mark spent protecting me, and the rearranging I did once I knew, both were a kind of accounting of what a life is actually for. Mark had been spending himself to keep my life undisturbed. The truth is, I did not want it undisturbed. I wanted it shared. A disturbed life next to my husband is worth more than a smooth one spent locked out of his hardest hour. And I have forgiven him, fully, without an asterisk, because a man who hides his own mortal fear specifically so that his wife can sleep is not a man who wronged me. He is a man who loved me clumsily, with the wrong tool, the way frightened people do. But I have asked him for one promise, and he has given it, and it is the most important promise of our late marriage. No more protecting me from the truth. We face what is coming with our eyes open and our hands together, whatever it is, however it goes. Let me tell you where we are now, because I know you are wondering. Mark is still in treatment. I am not going to stand here and tell you the story has a tidy ending, because we do not have one yet. Illness does not work on the schedule of a story. What I can tell you is that he is fighting it, and that the early signs are better than we feared in those first dark weeks, and that there is real and reasonable hope, and that we hold on to it together. That last word is the whole point. Together. Mark does not sit on the hallway floor anymore. He does not have to rebuild his face before I come home, because the face I see now is the real one. Tired, frightened sometimes, but real and mine, and not alone. We have been more honest with each other in these last months than in some of the easy years before, and there is a strange, hard gift in that I am still learning how to hold. I will tell you about one ordinary evening, because it is the one I would keep if I could keep only one. A few weeks ago, Mark came home from a hard appointment, gray and worn the way he gets, and he came through that same front door, past that same camera, and this time he did not sag against the wall, and he did not reach for his pills in secret, and he did not rebuild his face. This time he came straight into the kitchen where I was, and he sat down heavily at the table, and he said, "Today was a hard one." Just that, 3 words, and I sat down with him, and we had the hard evening together, openly, no performance, no hallway floor. It does not sound like much. It is everything. It is the entire difference between the marriage we almost lost and the marriage we have. My husband can come home and simply be tired and afraid in front of me now. That is what I got back. That is what the camera in the end gave me. And the camera is still by our front door. I look at it differently now. I went to it that night believing it would show me the end of my marriage. Instead, it showed me my husband telling the truth with his body in the one place he thought no one was watching. And it gave me back 4 months too late, but not too late entirely, the chance to actually be his wife. I will never resent that camera. It caught the most honest moment of our marriage, and it handed it to me just in time. Our grown children know now, too. That was its own hard conversation. Mark had wanted to protect them the same way he had tried to protect me, to carry it alone until there was good news to share. I did not let him make the same mistake twice. I sat with him and I said that our children were adults, that they loved their father, and that they had the same right I had, the right to be let into the room. And so we told them, together, the two of us, with the truth out in the open. And our kids did exactly what I knew they would do. They did not shatter, and they did not need protecting. They closed in around their father. They have been a strength none of us would have had if Mark had kept carrying it alone. A family, it turns out, is not a thing you protect by keeping it in the dark. It is a thing that only works when you let it see. I want to leave you with the two things this taught me. The first is for anyone who is, right now, carrying something heavy and frightening alone in order to spare someone you love. I understand the impulse with my whole heart. I married a man who did exactly that, and I love him, and his instinct came from the best place a human instinct can come from. But I am asking you to look hard at what your silence actually does. You believe you are sparing the person you love from fear. You are not. You are almost certainly only changing what they are afraid of and guaranteeing that they face it alone and in the dark. And you are taking from them something they would beg you for if they knew it was on the table. The chance to stand next to you in the hardest hour of your life and be of use. Love does not protect people by locking them out of the room. The person who loves you does not want to be spared the truth. They want to be trusted with it. The second thing is shorter. If you sense that someone you love has gone strange, distant, secretive, not themselves, be very, very slow to assume the worst. I spent 4 months absolutely certain my husband was betraying me, and I built that certainty out of real evidence, and I was completely wrong, because the same outward signs that point to betrayal also point to fear, to illness, to a person drowning quietly and trying not to splash. Before your mind hands you the darkest answer and calls it proof, ask the gentler question. Ask it out loud. Ask the person directly, with love, what is happening to you? Because I did not ask, not for 4 months, and the asking would have saved us both so much of the dark. If this story landed for you, drop the word footage in the comments below. I read them. It tells me which stories are worth telling next. Subscribe for new stories, real patterns, full narratives, the long game. 2 small pieces of wisdom from this one before I go. First, carrying a hard thing alone to protect someone is not the gift it feels like. When you hide your fear, your diagnosis, your trouble, you imagine you are sparing your loved one a weight. But fear shared is not doubled, it is halved, and the person you shut out does not feel protected. They feel, eventually, shut out. If you are facing something frightening, let the people who love you face it beside you. That is not a burden you are placing on them. It is a place at your side you are finally letting them have. Second, the same symptoms can tell 2 completely opposite stories, so do not let your fear be the narrator. Distance, secrecy, exhaustion, a loved one gone strange. Your frightened mind will rush to fill that silence with the worst story it knows, and it will feel like certainty. It is not certainty. It is only fear writing fiction. Before you convict someone in the privacy of your own head, walk up to them and ask the real question, gently and directly. The truth is almost never as dark as the silence makes it, and you will never know which story is true until you are brave enough to simply ask. Let them love you through it. I'll see you next time.